The Canadians fought splendidly on our flank. They were determined and steady troops, well handled and reliable under fire. Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley, Commanding General 1st U.S. Army. This quote referred to the D-Day landings in Normandy, France in June 1944. Many of you watched a previous video about what the British thought of Canadians in World War II, so it seemed like a good idea to explore what U.S. soldiers thought as well. Americans and Canadians fought side by side in Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and throughout Northwest Europe. On occasion, sometimes by accident, they met on the battlefield, and every now and then, those encounters left behind written impressions for future generations. So settle in for a look at how U.S. soldiers viewed their Canadian counterparts in World War II. One time we were with some Canadian soldiers, and that was a lot of fun. They were fierce fighters along with us, but that was not a very long engagement. We just sort of met there on the front. PFC Ernest A. Andrews, H Company, 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, also known as the Big Red One. Andrews was likely describing the Battle of the Falaise Pocket from August 12th to the 21st, 1944, where his division pushed from the south while the Canadian 2nd Corps attacked from the north and northwest. Our next impression comes from a famous unit, the same airborne company depicted in HBO's Band of Brothers. PFC Hank Zimmerman served in Easy Company, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. He was not portrayed in the series because he arrived later as a replacement. Interviewer: if you worked with any of the Allied troops, what was your impression of them? Did you serve with any Canadian, or British, or Australian troops? Zimmerman: they were all good soldiers. The Canadians, Australians, they were all good soldiers. After U.S. Army Captain Albert H. Smith, Jr. and other observers studied the Canadian 3rd Division's performance on Juno Beach, he later reported, "Our group clearly understood why Canadian units advanced so rapidly toward their deep D-Day objectives. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division's mission on Juno Beach was to push inland, seize key villages and roadways, and link up with British forces on Sword Beach to the east. It is widely reported, and true, that the Canadians advanced farther inland than any other landing force on D-Day, pushing about 7 miles or 11 kilometers. Some units even advanced so far that they became isolated and had to withdraw to friendly lines. The U.S. Army was clearly interested in how the Canadians achieved this. They examined factors such as terrain, detailed planning, and the determined action of Canadian soldiers, all of which contributed to their success despite German resistance." Master Sergeant Carl Beck of the 101st Airborne Division also acknowledged Canadian contributions within the wider Allied effort. The Canadian engineers brought up power boats and went across to rescue the rest of the British and Polish brigades. We would be remiss not to mention the joint U.S.-Canadian elite commando formation known as the Devil's Brigade. Formed in 1942 from a bold British proposal for a winter-trained super commando force, the U.S. adopted the idea and Canada joined as an equal partner. Together they created the first binational special operations unit. Trained in parachuting, mountain warfare, and brutal close combat, they became so feared that the German soldiers called them the Black Devils. Originally intended for operations in Norway, they instead fought in the Aleutians, Italy, and southern France. American members of the force consistently stated that cooperation with Canadians came naturally, and that they had deep respect for their fighting abilities. Back in North America, the two nations also worked closely on the Northwest Staging Route, a critical chain of airfields from Edmonton, Alberta, through northern Canada to Alaska. It was jointly operated by the Royal Canadian Air Force and the U.S. Army Air Forces. Brigadier General Del V. Gaffney, Commanding General of the Alaskan Wing Air Transport Command, described the Canadian personnel he encountered at U.S. post exchanges. The men from the RCAF base deliberate longer before making their purchases. They weigh values more cautiously. Canadian soldiers and aviators wait their turn graciously and quietly. He simply meant that Canadians tended to shop more thoughtfully than U.S. personnel. Gaffney likely worked closely with Canadian aircraft mechanics and support units, which adds context to his additional comment, paraphrased, that Canadians were serious-minded and focused. Even as prisoners of war, interactions between Americans and Canadians were friendly. Private Donald Johnson recalled trading across the fence with Canadian POWs. A barracks of Canadians were across the fence from us, and I made a deal for my field jacket. The Canadian gave me 25 American cigarettes, 1 loaf of bread, and 1 large turnip for it. One author wrote that Canadians managed to blend the virtues of both American and British military traditions without inheriting too many of their weaknesses. The Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, Dwight D. Eisenhower, later expressed his own admiration for Canadian soldiers. It is beyond the power of any man to add to the luster of the military reputation established by the brave men and women of Canada who served with me in Europe. No man can command a force in which your Canadians were included without feelings of deep humility and lasting pride. Those men were, for many months, my Canadians too, and no one can take from me the place they hold in my affection and admiration. He also added, "The Canadian Navy, pressing home the assault against the Normandy beaches. The bold pilots of the Royal Canadian Air Force, your record needs no embellishment from me." In the end, American soldiers and Canadians fought well together as part of the Allied coalition in World War II, and developed a genuine mutual respect from shared wartime experiences. As the U.S. Army Center of Military History summarized, the Americans respected the Canadians as aggressive, resourceful, and steady under fire. The national rivalries were good-natured, not hostile.